Well, there's so many questions, because one of the questions I have asked for years was James sexually abused? And I was protected so much that they wouldn't give me the answer to that, but now I'm learning different. You know,
was that looking back on that retrospectively, and what you'd all gone through and were having to go through and would go through for your whole lives? Did you really want to know that?
In the beginning, I wanted to know exactly what happened to James, because at the end of the day, he's my son, and you know, I thought, just kick me while I'm down, because I couldn't have got any lower. But you know, as I was moving on with my life, I chose, you know, I didn't want to know what happened to him, because I didn't want to go back down to where I was. But with all this coming up now, the questions are coming back. Well, to be quite honest with you, I wanted them to spend time in Venables prison. I want all my questions answered now.
Yeah.
And I don't want no lies, I don't want no cover-ups or nothing like that. I just want to be told the truth.
Police on Merseyside say that 2-year-old James Bulger, who disappeared from a shopping precinct at the weekend, was horribly murdered and then dumped on a railway line. They say that someone must know the identity of the 2 boys who took James from the precinct.
Inch by inch, the police have searched the railway line where 2-year-old James Bulger's body was found yesterday. The scene is still protected from the elements for forensic work. The body itself was removed late last night. His uncle had identified him. It had been spotted earlier by 4 schoolboys playing. The blurred images of 2 youths seen taking James away are now all over the city. The public say detectives hold the key to finding them. They believe James was killed locally, then his abandoned body was hit by a train. The shadow of this murder is hanging heavily over Liverpool. As flowers built up around the scene, James's family have spent the day being counselled by specially trained officers.
Following the abduction of James Bulger from the New Strand shopping precinct in Bootle on Friday the 12th of February 1993, and the subsequent findings of his body on the railway line in Walton on Sunday the 14th of February, 2 boys aged 10 years from Walton area have been arrested and are currently being interviewed by Merseyside police at police stations on Merseyside.
Robert Thompson and John Venables were just 10. And much to the nation's outrage, they were free again by the age of 18. In practical terms, Thompson and Venables don't exist anymore. After 8 years of therapy and rehabilitation, the authorities gave them new identities. The boys were set free with different names, different cover stories to allow them to lead normal lives. But they're not boys any longer. And at 27, John Venables is charged with a new and grotesque crime: downloading and distributing child pornography. It means the controversy over how 2 child murderers got off so lightly is exploding all over again.
I don't want no one to suffer. Never said lock them up and throw away the key. I knew one day they would walk, but I didn't think they'd walk so soon after being in the young offenders. Well, I'm on 2 minds on that, because I'm quite scared in case someone's mistaken as one of them 2 and something bad happens to someone innocent.
It's happened in the past as well.
It has happened in the past, right.
Because, as I say, all the money that's been spent on him, he's just laughing at everyone. He's laughing at the government, he's laughing at us, because he knows he can get away with it, and he's doing whatever he wants, and he is still getting away with it.
The police team, headed by Detective Superintendent Albert Kirby on the left, conducted a total of 20 separate interviews with the child defendants. In them, he consistently denies murdering James Bulger, but gradually admits to being with the toddler for more and more time on the day of his death. "It's not me," said A, "because I wouldn't take James."
Throughout the first interviews, John
told lie after lie after lie, and he only ever changed his tack when it was proved to him that what he was telling us was wrong.
At first, A says he remembers seeing James in the Strand shopping centre and was able to describe his clothing. In the interviews recorded in this room, a police officer asks him, "That's why you noticed the anorak so much, because B had hold of James's hand. Is that right?" "Yeah," replied A. He went on, "B said, 'Come here,' and he grabbed his hand and walked out of the Strand. He claimed, 'I told him to take him back. I'm getting all the blame for murdering him. We left him by the church.' But that story was later to change when A admitted they'd taken James as far as this grass-covered reservoir. He said by now the toddler was crying for his mum and that the boys left him there.
Thompson swung his legs between the chairs, swung them to and fro when he was either telling lies or I was getting anxious about certain questions.
Each boy now blamed the other for the crime.
But that story too was to alter, with an admission in the fourth interview that the boys took James onto the railway line. He said child B had thrown paint into James's eye, but that apart from that, James was uninjured. "We never killed him," he repeated.
At 6:15 in the evening of 20th of February, after 3 days of interviews, Jim Fitzsimmons charged John Venables with the abduction and murder of James Bulger.
I went down and charged him formally, and his mother and father were alongside him, and John Venables cried. I went to Walton Lane police station immediately afterwards, and I charged Robert Thompson, and Robert Thompson didn't say anything. There was no emotion whatsoever from Robert.
Oh, it just makes you cringe, you know, listen to this stuff in the courts and that, and look exactly what they've had to say. All this paedophile stuff with him, and this manual he had, it's just sickening.
In one of the quotes I read was that rehabilitation hasn't worked for this human being, has he? He gets a new identity, he's allowed to do whatever, those images on his computer. What do you think about the world we live in if you're allowed to get away with something like that?
Well, it's wrong. The laws have got to change, haven't they? Like the laws are behind the times now, and they need to be looked at, seriously looked at. And whatever we can do now, it's mainly for the public, for their kids.
What do you fear might happen if the anonymity isn't removed? What are your fears? Because you've mentioned you're worried for all parents out there. What are your fears?
Well, you wouldn't want this person living next door to you, would you? And you'd want to know who he is, so your kids aren't at risk. You know what I mean? But if they're taking that away from you, you haven't got a say, have you?
The boys did successfully abduct James Bulger, and so when their plan to push him in front of a car didn't work, the boys decided to take him to the canal, and there they were going to push him in and drown him, but somehow it didn't work. I don't really know how this all played out, but it didn't work pushing him into the canal, so he somehow got dropped on his head by one of the boys, and that was why he was bloody. When people were passing, they reported seeing a bloody little child that was crying, and that was where the blood came from. He got dropped on his head by this canal. So now the boys' first two plans hadn't worked, so then they decided to take him up onto the railway line. James Bulger's official cause of death was beating. These boys just beat him so badly and for so long and so viciously, and they just tortured him for so long, so many different ways, but his official cause of death was beating. The boys beat him and tortured him and then weighted him down on the railway track so that he couldn't get up, and then they left and let him get hit by a train. James was hit by a train and he was cut in two, although it was believed that he was dead before he was hit by the train due to his injuries.
Jailed John Venables vows he is determined for once and for all to become the person he wishes to be and will never go back. This comes after being jailed for the downloading and distribution of indecent images of children. Venables pleaded guilty via video link to 3 charges at the Old Bailey. No one except the judge saw his face. He was jailed for 2 years, with Mr Justice Bean saying it would be wrong to increase his sentence because he was one of the 2 people responsible for the horrific murder of James Bulger. Venables has apologised for his actions and also said he has thought about the death of James Bulger every day since 1993. But the High Court was told that Venables had been arrested on 2 previous occasions in recent years, leading to questions being raised about how to deal with repeat offenders. But in a statement from Denise Fergus, she believes the sentence is simply not enough.
We've been in court this morning and once again we've had to sit through proceedings where justice has not been done. These were very serious offences and 2 years is simply not enough to meet the gravity of what this person did.
This is one of the only images we are allowed to publish of Venables, as a court order remains in place, restricting the media from details of his new identity.
So I tell them not to worry, I'll get over it. I still say it even if I don't believe it, yeah. Can't stop thinking about the nights that I still regret. And I know